The mental competency framework, established by the 1960 Supreme Court case Dusky v. United States, asserts that defendants must possess a rational and factual understanding of legal proceedings and the ability to consult with counsel to stand trial. This standard, rooted in due process under the Fifth and 14th Amendments, emerged from a mid-20th century push to integrate psychiatric evaluations into criminal justice, ostensibly to protect mentally ill defendants from unfair trials. However, this framework is a deliberate construct of flawed motives, creating ambiguity and loopholes that undermine justice. By allowing subjective mental health assessments to delay or mitigate punishment, it enables criminals, particularly violent ones, to evade accountability, posing a direct threat to societal safety. This essay critically examines the mental competency standard as a fraudulent mechanism that prioritizes pseudoscience over retribution, arguing that all adults, regardless of mental state, must face severe punishment to protect society, especially vulnerable women and children. Advocates of mental competency evaluations, including psychiatrists and legal reformers, claim their efforts address asylum abuses and ensure fairness. Yet, their motives are suspect, driven by professional self-interest and a desire to complicate justice with interpretive ambiguity. The 1950s-1960s saw a surge in psychiatric influence, with the American Psychiatric Association and American Bar Association championing evaluations that introduced complexity into trials. This created a system where subjective diagnoses, often inconsistent, allowed defendants to exploit mental health defenses, delaying justice or escaping punishment. The public, concerned with rising violent crime, demanded accountability, not leniency, yet reformers imposed a framework that reversed logical justice. This essay contends that mentally ill offenders, particularly those committing heinous crimes, warrant harsher punishment when applicable, due to their heightened danger to society. The competency standard's reliance on subjective evaluations and evolving psychiatric methods fosters a culture of excuse-making, undermining deterrence. By examining the historical opposition, the flaws in evaluations, the societal impact, and the need for retributive justice, this analysis reveals the mental competency framework as a deliberate fraud that subverts societal protection. The argument for universal accountability, rooted in historical skepticism of mental health defenses, demands a return to punishing actions, not minds, to safeguard the innocent. Historical opposition to mental competency defenses. The opposition to mental competency defenses in the 1950s-1960s, as seen in cases like Dusky v. United States, argued that all adults must be held accountable for their actions, regardless of mental state. This perspective, rooted in retributive justice, emphasized deterrence and societal safety, rejecting psychiatric evaluations as subjective and prone to abuse. Prosecutors in Dusky contended that Milton Dusky's schizophrenia did not fully impair his trial capacity, reflecting a broader belief that mental illness should not excuse criminal responsibility. This stance aligned with public sentiment, driven by rising violent crime rates, which demanded punishment over leniency. Historical cases like Yahtzee v. United States in 1899 faced similar resistance, with courts prioritizing conviction over mental health considerations. The opposition viewed competency evaluations as a dangerous innovation, introducing ambiguity that allowed defendants to delay trials or evade justice. In the 1950s, conservative legal scholars within the American Bar Association's criminal justice section argued that mental health defenses undermine deterrence, as subjective psychiatric assessments varied widely, with only 70 to 80% agreement among evaluators. This subjectivity created loopholes, enabling strategic delays or dismissals, as seen in conflicting reports in Dusky's lower court proceedings. The public's demand for accountability was clear, yet reformers, driven by professional agendas, imposed a system that complicated justice. The opposition's argument, that actions, not mental states, should determine punishment, offered a straightforward solution to protect society. By rejecting mental health defenses, courts could ensure swift, severe consequences, particularly for violent offenders, whose mental instability only heightened their threat. This historical resistance underscores the validity of punishing all criminals, mentally ill or not, to maintain order and safety, a principle subverted by the competency framework's rise. Flaws in mental health evaluations. Mental health evaluations, central to the Dusky standard, are inherently flawed, relying on subjective assessments that invite manipulation and fraud. In the 1950s, psychiatric diagnoses, such as schizophrenia in Dusky's case, depended on clinical judgment, with limited diagnostic tools leading to 10 to 15% misdiagnosis rates. Evaluators, often court-appointed psychiatrists, faced pressure to assert their expertise, diagnosing issues to justify their role. This self-serving dynamic ensured that mental health problems were frequently identified, even when questionable, creating a system ripe for exploitation. The financial incentives for evaluators further corrupted the process. While Dusky's evaluations occurred in federal facilities, the rise of private evaluators post-1960s introduced conflicts of interest, with fees ranging from $500 to $5,000 per case. Prosecutors in Dusky and earlier cases like Bishop v. United States in 1956 noted conflicting psychiatric reports, highlighting the lack of objectivity. The risk of malingering, estimated at 15 to 20% of cases, allowed defendants to feign mental illness, delaying trials, or avoiding punishment. These flaws underscore the competency framework's role as a tool for leniency, not justice. The evolving nature of psychiatric methods compounded these issues. The American Psychiatric Association's DSM-I in 1952 introduced new diagnostic categories, but these shifted with societal pressures, as seen in later DSM revisions. Evaluators' political and social biases further skewed outcomes, favoring leniency for violent offenders. This subjectivity, coupled with financial motives, reveals mental health evaluations as a fraudulent mechanism that undermines accountability, allowing dangerous criminals to exploit the system while society bears the cost. Societal harm from mental competency defenses. The mental competency framework, by allowing mentally ill offenders to delay or evade punishment, directly harms society, particularly vulnerable women and children. Violent criminals, such as those with schizophrenia or other disorders, pose a heightened threat due to their inability to control impulses. The Dusky standard, by prioritizing trial fairness over immediate accountability, enables these offenders to exploit mental health defenses, delaying justice and risking further harm. Data from the 1960s shows violent crime rates rising, with public demand for severe punishment ignored in favor of reformist leniency. The framework's reliance on restoration, where 80 to 90% of defendants are returned to competency within 6 to 12 months, creates delays that weaken deterrence. Unrestorable defendants, though only 5 to 10%, may face civil commitment under 18 U.S.C. Section 4246, but this fails to deliver the swift retribution needed to protect society. The public, especially victims' families, demands execution or imprisonment for heinous crimes, yet the competency system allows dangerous offenders to manipulate outcomes, undermining trust in justice. This leniency reverses logical societal protection. Mentally ill offenders, far from deserving exemption, require harsher punishment due to their ongoing danger. The competency framework's ambiguity empowers criminals to exploit psychiatric diagnoses, leaving communities vulnerable. By prioritizing pseudoscientific evaluations over retribution, the system fails to safeguard the innocent, betraying its purported purpose and necessitating a return to universal accountability. Mentally ill offenders, particularly those committing heinous crimes, must face severe punishment, including execution, to protect society. The Dusky framework's focus on trial competency wrongly assumes that mental disability diminishes culpability, when it often signals greater danger. Violent offenders with mental illnesses, such as repeat murderers, demonstrate an inability to conform to societal norms, justifying their removal through the death penalty or life imprisonment. This retributive approach aligns with 1950s public sentiment, which demanded accountability amid rising crime rates. Legal precedents like Ford v. Wainwright in 1986 and Atkins v. Virginia in 2002, which limit execution for those unable to understand punishment, wrongly prioritize fairness over safety. These rulings, building on Dusky, create a system where mentally ill criminals exploit evaluations to avoid justice. Data shows 5 to 10% of death row inmates have severe mental illnesses, yet treatment reduces recidivism in only 70% of cases, leaving a dangerous minority unchecked. Execution ensures permanent removal, protecting vulnerable populations like women and children. The competency framework's advocates, including psychiatrists and legal reformers, promote a flawed system that serves their professional interests. Their pseudoscientific evaluations, prone to bias and manipulation, undermine justice by allowing delays or exemptions. Society demands a return to punishing actions, not minds, ensuring that mentally ill offenders face the harshest consequences to deter crime and safeguard the innocent. Conclusion: mental health defenses create ambiguity and shield violent criminals. The mental competency framework, enshrined in Dusky v. United States, represents a fraudulent construct that subverts justice by introducing ambiguity and leniency into criminal proceedings. By allowing subjective mental health evaluations to delay or mitigate punishment, it enables violent offenders to exploit loopholes, undermining societal safety. The historical opposition, rooted in retributive justice, rightly argued that all adults must be held accountable, regardless of mental state, to deter crime and protect the public. The flaws in psychiatric evaluations, subjectivity, financial incentives, and evolving standards reveal a system designed to serve evaluators' interests, not society's. The resulting harm, particularly to vulnerable women and children, demands a rejection of this framework in favor of universal accountability and severe punishment. The case for harsher penalties, including execution, rests on the heightened danger posed by mentally ill offenders. Far from deserving leniency, their inability to control violent impulses justifies their removal from society. The competency system's reliance on restoration, with 80 to 90% of defendants returned to trial within months, creates delays that weaken deterrence, while unrestorable cases risk inadequate confinement. Legal precedents like Ford and Atkins, which limit execution, prioritize a misguided fairness over public safety, allowing dangerous criminals to manipulate psychiatric diagnoses. Society requires a system that punishes actions, not minds, ensuring swift retribution to protect the innocent from repeat offenders. The advocates of mental competency defenses, driven by professional agendas, have constructed a pseudoscientific framework that reverses logical justice. Their evaluations, tainted by bias and financial motives, fail to deliver objective truth, instead creating a culture of excuse-making that betrays victims. The public's demand for accountability, evident in the 1950s and today, must prevail over reformist ideals that serve only to complicate justice. By abolishing mental health defenses and imposing severe punishments, society can restore order, deter crime, and protect its most vulnerable, ensuring that justice serves the collective good rather than the interests of a flawed elite.